mobile phone. He has a very ambivalent relationship with his mobile phone. His weekly usage report is usually less than a minute. But on this trip, we actually need the phone to format our drives that we use to record the audio. So he just forgot it, so he's just popped back to where we're staying. So apologies that we're running a little bit late. He'll be another 5 minutes probably. Yeah. In the meantime, welcome. It's lovely to see so many of you. I'm not, because we're not on. So if you can't hear, I'll just have to project more. We are a full house today because a lot of people were still on the waiting list and emailed me and said, could we just squeeze in? So I said, well, then it's going to be on the floor, on cushions, wherever we can be. So it's also a very hot day. Please be aware of that and drink a lot of water. We're going to try out some different things with fans. Here he is. Also, we need, Jesus and I want to thank our hosts, Yvette and Andy. So this is Yvette here in the green dress. They have very kindly made their property available to us for this event. Please, Yvette has set up some composting toilets, but you would have seen those of you who were in the email registration. They're really just for women on their menstruation or if you need to do a poo. Otherwise, if you could find somewhere in the bushes, it's much better for the environment. It's much better for the clean up at the end of the event. It's just better all round. We understand you want to be modest, so just go further afield. There's sort of lots of bush. And Yvette has kindly set up somewhere where you can wash your hands afterwards if you want or need to. What else do we need to say, Yvette? Oh, we'll have a break for lunch, and at that point we'll assess how the heat is going, and we might try to sit maybe under the trees after lunch. But it depends a lot on the wind. The wind affects our sound recording. So it's just going to be one of those days where we're just going to figure it out as we go along. So bear with us. And it's lovely to see so many of you. Some of you for the first time, some of you are back again. So that's lovely. Yvette, is there any other announcements we need to
make? Just a clean up, so if people are using plates or cups, which I'm more than happy for people to use, but please, there's a wash basin, so please clean your own plate and put it back the way you find it. Yes, that'd be very good. And any litter, of course, in the bin, and then there's a compost bucket for any compost fruits and veggies.
Yeah. So did everyone get that? Yeah. So Yvette has kindly provided you with plates and cups and stuff, but it's just an act of love to wash them up and dry them and put them back when you're done. We're still filling up, so we'll see how we go. There's some more cushions down here if people want to sit on the floor. All right, now I'm on.
I can't have it here because the mic stands, the mic people, so I'm going to put it somewhere else.
Now there are microphones that we'll be using today. I'll just show you a little bit about that. Because it's such a full house, it might be a case of passing microphones. Please be mindful, especially if Jesus or I are speaking. If you bump the microphone while we're speaking, it ends up being in the sound. It's quite distracting while you're here, but also in the afterwards, we make an audio recording for other people to listen to. And if you have that bumping sound in it, it's quite distracting, as you can imagine. So, yep. So please use the microphone. If Jesus or I call on you to speak, please use the microphone. And please make sure you can hear me through the speaker, can't you? It's not overwhelming, but you can tell now that it's on, you can hear me. So you want to hear the same thing when you are speaking, just a consciousness that it's coming through the speaker. Last week, because we're in the yurt and there's some creaking sounds in the floor, and as you can hear, and then when people weren't using the microphone, some people have tried to listen already to those recordings from last week, and they said it was very difficult to hear the audience. So if you can be mindful of that, that's also an act of love to the people who listen afterwards. Many of you are here because you've listened to talks with other people in other regions of the world and benefited from it, and you wanted to hear more. So you are now a part of that process. So if you can please be mindful of the microphones and just respectful of each other's space. You're all going to feel a bit hot and maybe a bit emotional today. because we're going to talk some straight facts with you guys and talk about spiritual matters that maybe make you a bit uncomfortable. If you are feeling uncomfortable, it's an opportunity just to feel. And if you do need to go outside and cry or feel whatever you feel, you can do that, but please just be mindful of the rest of the audience as you go out. Sound all right?
Yes.
Yeah. We're very happy to be here. It feels like an Australian summer day today.
That noise okay?
How are we going with the sound, darling? What do you think about that fan?
I think
It has to be on.
It has to be on,
Otherwise,
yeah,
we'll start
for
losing
everybody's
you
sake,
at the
yeah.
back. We'll try also to have sort of breaks every hour or so, just to use the bushes to go to the loo, but also to help shift some air out. Because every body, literally your body, generates heat as well. So we'll see how we go. How are you going, darling? Now that fan that's currently pointed on you guys, Jesus and I might have to commandeer at times as
Or
well.
if you put it, is it a swivel fan? Where you can be swivel?
But yeah, welcome. In general, we love your participation. So please feel free to put up your hand, ask a question anytime. Yeah. Now, in terms of microphones, I'm going to leave them here. Jose and Maxine, do you mind just sort of passing them around? Don't pass until either Jesus or I have indicated a person. Because sometimes people get a bit demanding and they want the microphone. Don't listen to them, listen to us. It's already hot, isn't
It's
it?
already well. Yeah.
You'll see.
Obviously, next time we come, we need a bigger venue. So that's something we'll sort out. We did try to organise a bigger venue during the week, but there's a whole complex thing that occurred there with spirits that we decided to not use that venue. Yeah.
Can everyone hear us both okay?
Yep,
Yep.
you're all good.
Okay.
Those are on.
They're on.
And
They record.
yes, I'll just make sure I'm. Okay. Okay, well I had to rush home because I forgot the mobile phone. The mobile phone's the only way to turn on all the recording, so I had to go and get that. Alright. Well, Mary's probably welcomed you, has she? Has she entertained you while I was away? You haven't seen her dance routine, have you?
I used to be a tap dancer.
So that's a shame that she didn't do that for you.
They couldn't see.
Yeah. Well, welcome, guys. It's lovely to see all of your new, and many of you new faces as well, and some of your old faces from last week. Welcome along today. Last week we started a conversation with people about this subject.
Hands on your mic.
Yeah, that fan's on my mic, so it's not going to be able to rotate towards me. Every time it blows across my mic. So it's missing me, that's good. Okay, so yes, so this subject, God's standards of love, was the subject that we started with last week. And unfortunately, we didn't get to talk much about God's standards of love last week for lots of different reasons. And a lot of the reasons were that it was quite difficult last week. We had quite a lot of spirit influence on the group last week, shutting down the group, shutting down their ability to listen. And also quite a lot of different types of spirits here who had different agendas. Now, during the week, Mary and I have attempted to talk with some of those groups of spirits. So we're hoping that today and tomorrow goes a bit more smoothly than last week.
Just that it feels a bit more open for you guys to engage for yourselves.
Yeah.
Often when there's spirits around, they sort of project at you to not concentrate as well.
Yeah, yeah. But one of the things we noticed here for the audience last week was there was a large amount of what we classify as aimlessness in everyone's life. So life without purpose, and particularly without a purpose to love and a purpose to love others. So this aimlessness has quite a lot of effect last week on the group, because there are lots of spirits who hook into aimlessness and then get you to do things that they want to do. And because you have no sort of drive and purpose of your own, it's very easy for them to influence you to do what they want you to do. And so for a lot of the people who were here last week, this sort of personal aimlessness was being driven, unfortunately, by spirits into what I'd call unloving or immoral behaviour. So such things like unloving sexual behaviour, for example. You know, God has standards of love when it comes to sexual behaviour, and we could feel that the spirits were sort of driving people into sort of unloving sexual behaviour. And that played out a lot between men and women in the audience. You could feel this unloving sexual behaviour, unloving sexual exchanges, as well as unloving exchanges between spirits and people on earth as well. And this has sort of has a big effect on people's aimlessness in their life, unfortunately. So there was that, and we tried to attempt to deal with some of the spirits involved with that, but they were very dark spirits and unfortunately didn't want to talk to us. So at the end of the day, there wasn't much we could do about that. That's something each of you who were here last week, and also some of you who this week will probably have similar problems, and you're going to have to work through those issues yourself, one by one, without sort of, because the group itself is the spirit group is attracted to your aimless desires. Does that make sense? In other words, your desire to not really do anything with your life. And yeah, for those who are just arriving, it's pretty tight in here. So unfortunately, there are a few
pass back
pillows
some
down the front.
cushions and maybe just
And
sort of in the centre
Maybe if you
area.
put them in the centre there.
It's a bit hard with the poles, we know.
Keep the microphone circulate as well.
So the aimlessness also has an effect with regard to another thing, and that is unloving belief systems. When you do not seek for truth yourself and you do not seek for a belief system yourself, what happens is many people around you will influence your beliefs one way or another. They'll push you in one direction and then push you in another direction, and you sort of become like a boat that's like a sailboat that's just driven by the direction of the wind, and you don't have any rudder, and you don't have any direction in your own life. And so people come along and they press you in one direction, so you go in that one direction. And other people come along and press you in another direction, so you go in that direction. Spirits come along, press you in a direction, so you go in that direction. And most people are not aware, we'll talk about this in a minute, that belief systems are very important. It's very important to have true beliefs, not false beliefs, not beliefs that are just anything goes. Because if you have true beliefs, you'll be in alignment with God's truth, which is the truth of the universe. If you have any false beliefs or no beliefs at all, which is very common nowadays to have no beliefs, and most people, you'll be able to be influenced in one direction, then another direction, then another direction. And in the process of being influenced in all these directions, you can end up doing some very damaging things to yourself and also to other people. So belief systems do matter, and a lot of people on earth have this sort of concept that it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're kind. You know, as long as you're a compassionate person, an understanding person, a kind person, it really doesn't matter what you believe. But many people, when they pass, find out that is not true. It does matter what you believe, because what you believe determines what you'll seek and what you'll look for, and also what you feel is possible. And so when you have strong feelings that certain things are not possible, you won't seek for them. You won't try to obtain them. And the trouble with that is that in the spirit world in particular, but also here on earth, there are things that are possible that the majority of people don't believe are possible. And so we don't end up trying to obtain them. One of those things is world unity. Ironically, a lot of people just don't think it's a too big a problem for humans to obtain, and so we don't each personally strive to obtain it, and we just sort of give up on it. And this is a trouble with unloving belief systems or having no belief systems, that it causes you to give up on things that are good, that are truthful, that are loving. And so this is something we want to raise with you. So these were problems that we were looking at last week. Is there any others we've often neglected to mention?
Yeah, well, with the aimlessness, we talked about the spirit influence, but also within aimlessness, there's very often selfishness, isn't there, and a lack of desire to love others.
That's right. So selfishness. Selfishness is like making a life around you, making your life, you become the centre of the life you're leading, and everything you do is about you and what you want to achieve and what you want to do, and very little thinking of others, very little concern for the welfare of others and things like that. And it's very much promoted by a lot of New Age ideas, actually. In New Age, the New Age movement, there's a lot of this idea that, I'm aiming for self-actualization. I'm aiming for, self-awareness. I'm aiming for, and if you think about many of the terms, they're all got the word self in front of them, and in the process of that, we don't realise we're actually becoming quite selfish and selfishly oriented, and we're not thinking about how to love others and how to care for others and what, because a big thing that's missing on earth at the moment is a lack of grace towards others, a lack of love towards others. Generosity is something that's very much missing nowadays in most people's lives. And in fact, rather than gifting people things, we talked about this last week, the desire to barter. In other words, I give you something that you think is worthwhile receiving, but in that process, I expect that you give me something that I feel is worthwhile to receive. And that's a barter system. That's not a gift system, and therefore it's not actually love, but most of us believe it's more loving than paying for something. But the reality is we are actually paying for something, but we're just paying for it using a different method, not money. We're paying for it using emotion or good or services that we provide, or a lot of times it's an emotional sexual exchange, in the sense of, if I make you feel good about yourself, then you'll give me something that I want in return. But if I make you feel bad about yourself, then all bets are off and you're going to slam me instead. That kind of thing. So there's very much this idea on earth to barter. Everyone barters with each other, and particularly barters emotionally. They barter things like, I give you an emotion, you give me an emotion. You see this in almost every area of life. Musicians do it all the time, right? They're giving this feeling with their music of connectivity with everybody, and as long as they give that feeling, everybody will pay to go to their concerts and everything else. But as soon as that doesn't happen, then everybody thinks, not interested in that person anymore. And it's very much a bartering system. So unfortunately, these systems on earth are very damaging to our future and very damaging to our ability to love in particular. So we wanted to just mention last week to those of you who weren't there last week, so you get a bit of a picture of where we're going to start today. Does that make sense? So today's going to be like a bit of a continuance of our discussion last week, but handled in a bit of a different fashion than last week.
Now, Jay, before you move on, there's a couple of other things we're going to mention about last week that kind of follow on from that emotional barter.
That's right.
Yep. So with the relationships between men and women,
Yes.
So what we saw last week was in a lot of the men who attended, they desire power over women. And I'll let you throw that up. And sometimes that was sexual power, sometimes that's emotional power, but really a feeling entitled to be in control of the woman's life.
Yeah, so entitlement to sort of make choices for the woman, an entitlement to sort of, if you're in a family, an entitlement that you're the one the woman should listen to. She shouldn't listen to God, she should listen to you first. She shouldn't obey God's standards, she should obey your standards first. You know, and so this is a very strong emotional injury that most men on the planet have, and most men on the planet don't believe they have. And so it played out a lot in our group last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, we had a lot of women who want to give to men. And basically willing to give everything that they have, emotionally, physically, sexually, without much concern for their own care of themselves. And oftentimes being sexually attracted to those dominating men, the men who want power.
Yeah. So this is, you'll see this a lot where women are basically taught fundamentally that the role of a woman is to nurture, right? And this applies a lot to nurturing men. You see it a lot in a family where the male children are allowed to get away with more than the female children are. The female children have to learn how to cook, how to clean, how to tidy up after themselves, but the male children don't have to do these things, for example. It's a common view in families. So this whole women nurturing men actually creates in men this underlying desire for power and control over women as well. So a lot of times we see even little boys, 5 years of age, have total control of their mothers because of that injury. And so what that little boy, when he grows up to be an adult 30-year-old male, and I wouldn't call him an adult because he's probably still a little boy emotionally, he hasn't learned how to be self-responsible or anything, but he's now outwardly an adult male, in his 30s, and you still see mummy nurturing him. In my own family, I saw my own mother, cook, clean, prepare meals for my brother when he was still 50. So he's 11 years younger than I am. I'm 61, he's 50. And he was still living at home even though he owned a couple of other properties that he could have lived in, because it was very convenient, because mum did this, nurtured him all through his life. So he also had that expectation that women would do that as well.
And also within that, there's, because women are wanting or feeling attracted to a man who want the power, often they're denying responsibility for some of the aspects of their own life, aren't they?
That's right.
Self-responsibility for creation. And
so often women do this because they're afraid of financial matters. They want a man to provide for them financially, or they want a man to protect them from other men, things like that. And so they enter this state of nurturing. But also, many of you ladies do believe that, the role of a woman is to have children. The role of a woman is to nurture those children. And there's what you call a loving nurturing, which is really a teaching process, versus a nurturing, which is addictive, which ends up with the men feeling they do boss the women around. They are allowed to. It causes that sort of underlying dynamic. And so for thousands of years, these have been problems on earth, but most people don't recognise them as problems in their personal life. What else is on our list, Steve?
that was all from last week.
That was last week?
But then our plan was to hit you with some truths of the universe, and perhaps that would lead our discussion for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So these topics that you're going to raise now.
Yeah. So what we decided we would do this time is, instead of labouring and having long discussions on points like we did last week, we're going to just go bang, 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 bang with 4 or 5 main issues. Does that make sense? And we'll probably spend 5 or 10 minutes on each main issue before lunch. And then what we'll do is we'll have a break, and then we're going to just leave it up to you then to drive the discussion on any one of those major issues. But we're not going to discuss any other issues. We're going to discuss these 5 main issues. Does that sound all right with you? So that allows you to ask questions on these issues and allows you to sort of focus your attention on these issues. But we want to raise these issues because we see that the understanding of these particular things, particularly in this region of Portugal, is a major problem. And it's a major problem among those of you who are expatriated, I suppose you could say, you're expats, but it's also a major problem amongst just general people in the population in terms of what's going on spiritually in this location. So we want to raise the issues one at a time with you. We'll spend about 10 minutes explaining those issues, and we're going to give you a very loose, very unlike what we would normally do, by the way, very loose description of each issue. And then we basically want to open it to you to see whether you have a desire to know more about those issues or not. Does that follow? G'day. All right, the first issue is truth. I'm going to make some statements. There is absolute truth. A lot of people would like to believe that, you know, you got your truth, my truth, Mary's truth, Joe Blow down the road's truth. You know, everyone has their own truth, and that's all good. That's all fine. And God's answer to that is, I'm sorry, no, it's not. That's why we got most of the problems we got on earth is because most of us disagree about what truth is. Right? So there is an absolute truth. That absolute truth belongs to God. It's not yours. Right? It's God's. And we'll talk more about God in a minute, about how we define God, but absolute truth belongs to God. It is God's truth. God, the universal creator, defined the laws of the universe, defined everything about, he created your soul, he created the processes that created your bodies, he created the laws that govern the entire system. He knows everything about truth. Humans know a very tiny, we're like ants, we know a very tiny subset of that truth at the moment. Ironically, we know more physical truth than we do any other types of truth. So, but when it comes to things like sexual truth, emotional truth, spiritual truth, humans know very, very little, right, of that truth. Physical truth, we are more focused towards discovering because physical truth governs your life every day. So, for example, many of you accept God's laws when it comes to physical matters. An example of that is the law of gravity. You accept it. You're not raging against it from the time you're a couple of years old, right? You are trying to discover ways to overcome the law from a couple of years old sometimes, aren't you? Like, I remember when I was 4 or 5 trying to fly and all that kind of stuff, you know, jump off a tree with a parachute type of thing and see how it goes. Of course, it can go very well, but, you know, I didn't understand aerodynamics, but if I understood aerodynamics, it might have worked, right? So we try to discover the law, and in fact, there's many things we do now that are completely dependent on these laws. So the laws that govern electromagnetic communication, for example, you guys are using every day. Somebody discovered them. Most of you have no idea how they work, isn't that true? Right? But you use them every day. You are reliant on them every day. So therefore, you know there is physical laws that you can rely on every day. In fact, you put your whole life in the hands of them sometimes. Like the law of aerodynamics, how many of you have not flown in a plane? No one. So all of you have entrusted your life to the scientists and everybody who discovered those laws. You've entrusted your life to them. Even though the law of gravity, it's a pretty powerful law. If there was no aerodynamics, that plane would be out of the sky within a few moments, right? But the other law overcomes the first law, And the fact is, humans took a long time on this earth to discover aerodynamic laws. It was only in the early part of the 20th century that we actually finalised, you could say, our discovery of those laws. Even after millennia, like humans have been on this earth for over 160,000 years, and we only realised how to use that law very recently, right? But we now rely on it, and this is the absolute truth. Means that there's also absolute law. Right?
And following on from that, we can say that our beliefs matter, because if we decide that the law of gravity doesn't exist for us, there's a lot of consequences, isn't there? Usually death. We jump off something high and we die. But if we think about that in a spiritual sense, then our beliefs matter, don't they? Because if we believe in lies, we create pain and suffering for ourselves. If we seek truth and we know the absolute truth, that always leads to our happiness.
Mm. So beliefs matter, as Mary just illustrated, in the physical, because like laws of gravity, aerodynamics, and other things that you could say they're physical laws. Beliefs also matter with regard to sexual laws, emotional laws, spiritual laws, most of which most humans completely ignore or don't understand at all. Right? But beliefs matter there as well. Anytime you believe something in harmony with the law, you can use the law to your advantage. Every time you believe something out of harmony with the law, it'll be to your disadvantage. Right? So advantage meaning happiness, safety, security. Disadvantage meaning unhappiness, sadness, grief, pain, suffering, insecure, disadvantage. It's going to be to your disadvantage. So beliefs do matter. And one of the things we encountered last week was there were a lot of Buddhist spirits with us last week. Because many of the people in the audience were also from that sort of leaning of the Buddhism philosophy. And we talked to these spirits during the week as to what their beliefs were, and they said they had none.
That beliefs were a problem.
That beliefs were a problem. And I asked them why they felt beliefs were a problem, and they said, because the way we progressed in the spirit world was by getting rid of all of our beliefs. And then I said to them, are you sure that was getting rid of all your beliefs, or was it getting rid of the false ones that caused you to progress? And then they go, well, that's an interesting point. We didn't think about that. We didn't think that maybe it was in the process of getting rid of all our beliefs, we actually got rid of some false ones, and that's what helped us progress. And they didn't understand that that's why they had progress, because they got rid of some false beliefs. And they thought getting rid of all beliefs was the solution. And so when we started trying to discuss with them the idea or concept that God has truth to share, they just went into a major meltdown. And we were talking at the time to around about 300,000 spirits, and half of them left. As soon as we started talking about this concept that beliefs matter, half of them just left the conversation. And the other half that stayed said, can you not talk to us about beliefs?
They were quite frightened because they realised that in their past that they had felt very constrained or unhappy by the beliefs that they'd had, and by giving them up, they thought that's the way that leads to my happiness and my spiritual development. So the thought of even considering another belief triggered a lot of fear in them, that maybe this was going to lead to restriction.
So they were really worried and frightened. And so they said, look, can you not talk about beliefs? And I'm going, well, how do I now help them without talking about beliefs? And so we come up with an idea of just giving them an experience with God, with truth and with love. So we said, all right, we don't talk about beliefs. We'll just talk about a simple thing. You can receive truth from God by asking God a question and then feeling God's emotional response to you. And they did that, and they asked a number of questions. The first one was, is there a God? And then they had, from outside of themselves, a response that said yes, even though they felt no. So they then realised, somebody else is telling me there is, and I'm believing there's not. So, and then the next question was, are you God? And the answer from God was no. Am I God? No. That was the answer from God. And they go, okay, am I a part of God? No. Right. Do I have the divine spark? No. That's the answer from God. No. And that's maybe a shocking one for many of you to hear, right?
Maybe something for a question.
Something
later
for
on.
a question later. So no, the answer was from God. And then they sort of go, well, does truth matter? Was the next question. For an answer from God was, yes. Yes, truth matters. So they thought that it didn't matter. And that was a major thing for them to come to understand. And we got them to ask why it matters, and they couldn't receive the answer from God as to why. So we had to discuss a little bit about why. And the reason why is because anything that is untruthful is going to bring you unhappiness. That's why it matters. So beliefs do matter, and beliefs in all areas of your life matter. So you can't go, I'm going to accept the physical beliefs, like the laws that govern me physically. I'll accept all of that. But on the other hand, if I don't understand or don't accept the laws that govern me sexually and emotionally and spiritually, then of course I'm going to have sexual pain and suffering, I'm going to have emotional pain and suffering, and I'm going to have spiritual pain and suffering. But unfortunately for most people on earth, we zone out of all that pain and suffering, so we focus on physical things giving me substitutes for all the things that I don't understand. And this is why frequently we get addicted to substances, because we're making substitutions of substances over having truth in other areas of our life. So the example of that is, let's say I've got a whole series of emotions I don't understand, so I decide to numb them with alcohol. So I'm now turning to a substance to alleviate my pain and suffering emotionally. And this is very common. This is why people smoke and drink and do all of these kind of things that are damaging to self. And for a large part, it's because there's beliefs they have and emotions they have that they don't understand the laws about. And then they try to get substances to alleviate the damage that's occurred by breaking those laws. You can raise questions about that. That's as much probably as what we're going to say about that. Now, there's more here about truth, wasn't there? There's beliefs matter.
Truthful beliefs lead to happiness, lies lead to sin, despair, and sadness.
Yes, so the fundamental thing to understand is this. Truth will bring you happiness. It doesn't matter what truth, it's going to bring you happiness in the long term. Lies or false beliefs or no beliefs are going to bring you unhappiness. They're going to result in pain and suffering in your future. Now, that future might not be here. That future may be after you pass. Pain and suffering then. So Mary and I have seen many, many billions of spirits in pain and suffering because of the beliefs they had on earth that they retained when they passed, and that stopped them from making progress after they had passed into the spirit world. The spirit world, as we talked about last week, the spirit world is a superset of everything you can do here. Like, it's better than anything you can experience here. It's more complete than anything you can experience here. Your spirit body is more capable than your physical body is. Your spirit body can see more, it can hear more, it can smell more, it can do more, it can feel more than your physical body is capable of doing. So in terms of sensorially, it has more senses. And as a result of that, the spirit life is far more fulfilling generally than a person's life on earth, as long as they understand that their beliefs on earth are carried forward into that existence. And if you carry forward false beliefs into that existence, you're going to find yourself being more sensitive to the pain and suffering of them. Right? So it's important to understand that now, that beliefs matter. What you believe, if it's true, it'll help you, it'll make you happier. If it's false, it'll make you unhappier. It'll cause you to do things that are often out of harmony with love and therefore damaging to yourself and others. Beliefs matter. Don't get tied into any earth philosophy that says beliefs don't matter. because they do. Yeah. So that's the issue of truth, isn't it?
Yep, that was number one.
That's number one. How long did I go there? Anybody keep a track of me? Probably 10 minutes, maybe.
Maybe we should measure in like particles of sweat. How
Yeah.
many particles?
Good idea.
Okay.
All right.
What will happen in your future is you will come to love truth. You will love it. Like it'll become like a burning passion for you to discover it and to understand it, because you know and have conviction in yourself that it's going to bring you happiness in your life and satisfaction in your life. It's going to help you. So once you get to that stage of loving truth, nothing will stop you discovering it. And in the first century, there's a quote in the Bible that says, the truth will set you free, and that I actually said, and that is very true. The truth will set you free. That's why it's so important to understand. It exists. Absolute truth exists. It is the purview, it is the domain of God. So the more connected with God you become, it also logically makes sense, the more connected with truth you will become. And by the way, God is not mystical. He's not trying to go, let's create some kind of fantastical experience for you so that you can, be taken on this nice journey to discover truth. No, he wants to plainly and simply share it with you. He's not going to beat around the bush with you. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to say to you, yes, because you did something wrong years ago, I'm going to withhold some truth from you. He doesn't want to do that either. He wants to gift you as much truth as you are emotionally capable of receiving. That's what he wants. And he wants to do that every day, every moment of your day. So let him do it. And that's another good question. How do I let him do it? Isn't it? Okay. Truth. One subject we want to focus on this 2 days. All right, next subject. Well, I suppose that subject raises this subject, which is the subject of God. And why haven't I put that subject first? Which is really where it belongs. Any ideas? Can you see that truth, if I don't understand there is a truth that God exists, then that is going to have an effect on what I try to discover about God. All right, so let's look at some truths about God. God exists. God is real. Okay? Now, I've had many discussions in the past, hundreds of hours of videos have been done about why that is true, but for the moment, I just want to say this is the reality. God exists, God is real, and I want to say a third thing which is very important. God is an entity. God does not live in the universe. God created the universe. Therefore, it makes logical sense that he doesn't live in it. Because he existed before the universe existed. So God does not live in the universe. There's this common views on earth, that somewhere God's the centre of the universe, or God's the, like an anthropomorphic, man-looking person or a woman-looking person, depending on which injury you have about men or women, perhaps. But God doesn't live in the universe. God is not human. Never has been either. Right? That also then means that Jesus is not God. a lot of you will see videos of me where people are asking me, "Am I Jesus?" And as soon as I say I am, they say, "I've got enough video now. I've said enough now," because for many of them that means I'm saying that I'm God. And in fact, quite a number of different interviews we've done, I've said I'm Jesus, they've taken that, put it on telly, and then said as a speakover, he's saying he's God. Not true. None of you will ever be God, including me. We will never be God. We can never be God. God's infinite in nature. We can never be God. We can receive things from God, is what we can do. But that has to be a choice you make. God's not going to force that choice on you. So if you want to receive love from God, you have to make the choice to do it. You have to decide to do it. And you have to obey his laws about how to do it. Right? There's only, he's created a law that governs how to do it. And unless you engage that law, you will not be able to do it. You do not have a spark of the divine in you in the sense that there's no part of God in you. Unless you ask for it. And then, unless you ask for it. Unless you desire it through prayer is really the way to ask. But we'll talk about prayer and what that is if you want to. But these are important things to understand about God. God is not nature. Nature is not God. God created nature. You can say nature is an expression of God's personality, but it isn't God. Nature, if left untouched by humans, will be in harmony with God's personality too. But it is not God. It is a creation of God. Humans are a creation of God. We are not gods. We will never be. Every person who ever believes that has major problems, particularly during life on earth, but also after they pass. And I've seen spirits who stay in the spirit world, in certain parts of the spirit world, for thousands and thousands of years, not progressing because they believe they're God. I've met Buddha and talked to him. He believes he's God. But he's not God. He just believes he is. Right? So I've met him. He's in the sixth sphere of the spirit world. He can't progress beyond the sixth sphere of the spirit world without recognizing that God isn't him. He is not God. And so that's where he stayed. From many hundreds of years after he passed, he reached the sixth sphere. And after that point, he couldn't progress any further. Because he still thinks he's God or a part of God. And he's not. A false belief, an example of a false belief, stopping progress. God is a very important subject. For me, it was the most important subject because if God exists, then I can talk to God and ask God questions and get answers from God. It'd be better for me to do that than get answers from anyone else, given the fact that God knows everything and everybody else knows very little. So the best person to talk to find out the truth is God. Very important truth. Is there anything I've neglected in that list?
Just that God is the authority in the universe.
Oh, yes.
And that God...
He has laws. He all the things, what you call gravity is a law that God made. He constructed matter. He understands the time and space. He understands how matter is constructed, how it's formulated. He actually constructed the fundamental building blocks of matter themselves, far smaller particles than what humans have currently discovered. And he made them. So he knows how they all work because he made them. He made the laws that govern them. So he knows everything about the world, the universe. He created you. He knows everything about you, how you work. He knows how you work physiologically in your physical body, but he also knows how you work in your spiritual body, and he also knows how your soul works. And your soul and your spirit body are not the same things. And he knows how all of those things work. So it makes sense to me, the best person to ask if you want to know something, is the person who created the thing. You know? You want to know how a car works? Well, go and find the man that made it, or read the manual he wrote, and work out how it works. That's the best way to work out how something works, isn't it? So, same with God. God has, you could say, God has inbuilt in himself the manuals for everything he's ever created. So, it'd pay for us to ask God. So that's the subject of God. Most important subject in the universe. Right?
Perhaps within the authority, we should mention that part of God's authority is that God has standards of love, which is what we started to talk about last week.
That's right.
And that God loves us. And the laws that God has created, she's created because she loves us, because she desires our happiness.
And she does care about your welfare, your not only your physical welfare, but your emotional welfare and your sexual welfare and your spiritual welfare. God cares about all aspects of you, and God knows where you're at every point of your life. God knows every experience you've had. God understands why you had those experiences, what choices you made to lead you to those experiences, what choices other people made to lead you to those experiences. God also knows. So God's the best source of all information.
Okay, so we've covered truth and God. Our next subject is law, which really follows on from what we were just talking about. The fact that there are laws governing our existence. There's laws governing the entire universe in which we exist.
So this is a crash course of major subjects. Laws. Laws are how things work. What governs how things work. You could say they are the organisational structure of the universe. It's why the universe functions. It's all governed by laws. God created laws. So you could also say that a part of God's nature is organised structure. God likes organised structure. You see this in the physical universe a lot, where organised structure, where things symbiotically work together, where, like we're breathing air, but something else produces it. We don't produce it ourselves. That's an organised structure. It requires two things, us and trees, to work symbiotically. What we expel, they breathe in. What we need, they breathe out. Right? That's a symbiotic arrangement between trees and us. Without them providing that oxygen, we would die. Right? So that's another example of organised structure. God created that organised structure. Phone's off, thanks. Okay, what else?
Well, we might talk about the types of laws.
There's four, really. Well, you can say there's two things we probably need to mention about law. Firstly, law has hierarchy. In other words, there's some laws that operate, but then there's other laws that can overcome the operation of the first law. So a physical example of that is the law of gravity, right, can be overcome by the law of aerodynamics. Now, of course, God didn't name it the law of gravity, and God didn't name it the law of aerodynamics. We did that. But they are laws that God created, fixed laws that God created. Gravity based upon matter, mass, and aerodynamics needs a atmosphere. Right? But of course, when it comes to things like going through space, there's no atmosphere. So then there's other laws that govern that. Right? Movement through space, propulsion. So every law, you can see the law of gravity can be overcome by the law of aerodynamics, but it's not, the law of gravity still exists, doesn't it? Even though we're flying in a plane, gravity still exists. But because we used another law that was more powerful, you could say, than the first law, it could overcome it. As long as we understood the mechanisms or the mechanics of the law, it can overcome it. So there's an example of physical hierarchy of a law. You've got gravity, the lower law, governs us from flying off the planet, and aerodynamics allows us to fly off the surface of the planet under controlled conditions, as long as we engage the law. So gravity is a lower law in the hierarchy of physical laws than aerodynamics is. Right? So there's an example of hierarchy. The other thing Mary mentioned was?
What did I mention?
Well,
Spiritual laws.
no, the areas.
Yep, so physical laws, sexual laws.
So let's look at the types. So that's hierarchy. Now we want to look at the types of laws.
Well, we should say on the point of hierarchy that you gave a physical example, but there are spiritual and emotional examples
And sexual examples.
of laws that govern your happiness or unhappiness, depending on how in harmony with the law you are or out of harmony with it, is going to create a state of unhappiness or happiness. And there are also higher laws that you can engage which can bring you happiness sooner, if you like.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so
So the
types of laws. Well, we could basically fundamentally divide them as it affects the human into 4 areas. There's the physical area of life, which is quite obvious. So the way your body works, the way you sit the way you're on the ground, the external things that are required for your body to function, the internal things that are required for your body to function. You could say all of those are physical laws. They define the physicality of your existence on Earth. Laws that define the senses of your body, the sense of taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. These are all physical laws that govern your life, right? Then we've got sexual ones. These start through the onset of certain processes that occur in the soul that trigger the body to go into a process that here on Earth we call puberty, that trigger a whole set of hormonal conditions in your body that operate in harmony with some areas of your soul. So these are it's an interrelationship between the soul and the 2 bodies, creating a whole series of desires that you didn't have prior, but now you do have. And you could say there's this sexual area of your life which is also governed by law. And these laws are often called morals. So there is such a thing as morality. Right? God has actually created such a thing as morality. And it's interesting that all the people on earth who believe that's not true, when they pass, they're in areas of the spirit world where they have to learn that it is true. Right? I've talked to many, many spirits who believed on earth there was no such thing as sexual morality, only to find that they were in the hells of the spirit world. And by the way, there are hells in the spirit world. And they arrived there because they needed to learn what those moral laws were. All right, then there's emotional laws. These laws cover how emotions work. They're mathematical formulas that define what emotions are, what types of emotions there are, and how they work and how they're transmitted between people, and how, in fact, you can receive emotions from God even. And also, emotional laws are interesting in that they are not bound by physical limitations such as the speed of light. They are faster than the speed of light. They are able to be transmitted from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe instantly, not bound by space or time. So it's a very interesting mathematical truth about emotions. This is why emotions are far more powerful than intellect, because the intellect cannot do that. Intellect can only be transmitted at the speed of light or lower. Emotions go way beyond that. Right? So these are truths that people on earth, don't understand yet, but once you connect to God and find it and ask God questions about these matters, you'll discover some truths about your emotional self that are fascinating, but also that will improve your happiness and joy in life if you engage them. You could say they are emotional laws that govern your emotion. There's also laws that govern your emotion that say if you do something out of harmony with love, you will have a bad feeling that results from it. And that bad feeling gets stored in your soul. And unless you go through that bad feeling, you'll never get rid of it. There's laws that define that. So we can talk about that too. Emotional, and then there's also spiritual laws. These are ones you could say that are what govern the relationships surrounding qualities such as, so spiritual qualities that are spiritual are love, truth, faith, humility. And then of those particular qualities, you can see that there are sub-qualities, like truth has things like honesty, transparency, openness. You know, love has qualities like kindness, compassion, understanding, caring. Humility has qualities such as the opposite of arrogance. In other words, I can look at new things and examine them without feeling like I've got to fight them all the time. So the opposite of humility is resistance, right? Attack. Humility is soft, gentle, receiving, right? So these qualities are all spiritual qualities, and they have the highest hierarchy on the soul. In other words, it's the spiritual qualities that determine the most the soul's happiness. The hierarchy is spiritual things are the top of the hierarchy. Emotional things, lower on the hierarchy in the soul. Sexual things, lower on the hierarchy in the soul. And physical things, the lowest hierarchy in the soul. So in other words, let's say you're using a substance like alcohol to suppress your emotional feelings. What you're doing is you're using a substance from the lower hierarchy, the physical area of life, to try and suppress something that's of a higher hierarchy, the emotional area of your life. It's going to be impossible. It won't work. That's why you can drink and drink and drink and drink and drink yourself into oblivion and you still feel bad. Right? Because it's never going to work. You have to learn why that's there, rather than trying to get something from the physical to solve it. Yeah? That's an example of hierarchy at work with regard to God's laws. Now, I know in making these 10-minute claims that I'm opening a can of worms, or you could say I'm opening up whole areas of like investigation, right? Of where we could go far, far deeper into these things. And Mary and I have got 2,000 hours of videos on YouTube, and we've barely scratched the surface, right, of what we'd like to teach. So, but you can see what we're trying to raise here in this quick discussion with you is 5 major areas of consideration for your life in order to bring you more happiness. Yep. So I think we've covered that one.
Yep, we have.
Yep.
Yep.
So on to the next one.
The next one is the subject of sin.
Yes, the highly controversial subject of sin. What do you say?
Using all the buzzwords.
Sin. Buzzwords. What is sin a buzzword?
Well, I mean the highly emotive words. Things like God, absolute truth,
Yeah,
sin.
like
They're
when we talk about
moral.
God, almost everybody has a meltdown at some point. And then if we talk about sin, the meltdown is usually even stronger then. So sin is a big issue for.
Well, many times we've had experiences on earth, haven't we, with these words, with people with different emotions. using
Where they
words
judge
like
you or condemn
sin
you
or
or make you feel bad about yourself, or we're not trying to do that. So, but it is a valid thing. Sin. And you wanted to, you just have a microphone to ask that. Oh, you're asking for a toilet break. Do I want it? No, I want to.
So we want to keep going.
I want to
We're 20 minutes out.
20 minutes out.
But you,
So
you
you're
can
going to
go.
have to go out if you have to go. Sin, okay, let's look at it. We've got this sin subject and one more subject. Sin, what is it? It is not being loving is what it is. All right, so from God's standard, not from yours. So in other words, every time you break one of God's laws of love, from God's perspective, you have sinned. Make sense? Now, sin just means missing the mark of love. It comes from a word where you are aiming at a target with a bow and arrow, and you release the arrow, and you miss the target.
Yes.
Right? So that's where it comes from. So it's just like missing the target being living in harmony with the law of love. That's the target. And when we sin, we've missed it. We're not loving in one way or the other. Yep. Okay. There's two ways we can sin. Two primary ways. One is by omission. In other words, love would demand we do something, and we decided not to. So an example of that, you see someone suffering, you have the power, the means to help them, the energy to help them, and you decide not to. That's a sin of omission. There's a law that governs the penalty on your soul for the sin of omission. Right? Then there's the sin of commission. Sin of commission is, I choose to do something, but it was unloving. Right? Another example of that, I chose to rape somebody. I chose to murder them. I chose to harm them in some way. I chose to lie, or I chose to steal, or I chose to even do some really simple things like I chose to get an addiction from them. From God's perspective, that's a sin. Right? That's called a sin of commission. That's where I chose to do the wrong thing. Or you could say, I chose to do the unloving thing. Or you could also say it another way, I chose to sin. All right? This one here is, omission is a bit less obvious sometimes. I'm choosing to not do the loving thing. All right? When I had the opportunity to do it, but I chose to not do it. When it comes to the environment, almost everyone on earth is sinning in that way, every day. There's a lot of things we can do to help the environment, and we choose not to. An example of that is, what do you do with your waste? Like, if you eat the way God intends, most of your waste will be like vegetable matter, really. So what do you do with it? Do you chuck it in a plastic bag and chuck it in a bin and get it taken away? Or do you dig up areas of your garden and put it in your garden? Well, if you do the first, you're actually choosing from God's perspective to sin. Right? Now, of course, there's hierarchy, and if you sin against the environment, it's less bad, you could say. There's lower penalties for sinning against the environment than there are for sinning against a person. Right? That is also true, but nevertheless, we can still sin against the environment. God has laws. If you think about it, it makes sense. God has laws that say, choose to treat your environment well, because if you don't, eventually you'll find yourself suffering from choosing to treat it badly. And this is where we're headed on the planet. We're headed into this place where by choosing to treat the environment in a selfish way all the time, we're headed to a place where the environment's going to be in such a bad condition that we will not be able to get from it what we need to live. It's going to be in that bad a condition. And that will be because we have chosen to sin against the environment by sins of omission, by not doing things to fix the environment, by not caring for it as much. Yep. And by the way, just a little comment there, recycling isn't caring for the environment. You can raise that issue as an issue later if you want. And we can have an argument about that. All right.
All right, there's a few more things we wanted to say about sin, particularly about penalty.
Yes.
So there is a penalty associated with every sin, and it's particular to the type of sin and where in the hierarchy that sin is existing.
Let's talk about penalty and reward. When you choose to not be loving, the way God's created the universe is there will always be a penalty. That penalty is on your soul first, and then it is also usually expressed in your environment in some way as well. Right? But there will always be a penalty if you choose to not be loving. If you choose to be loving, there is always a reward. So if you choose to be loving, you will always be rewarded. Now, a lot of those rewards maybe won't come from people, because a lot of people want to sin, and so they want you to do the unloving thing. But the rewards will come from God and his laws. And you will notice it after time that that is true. So there is a penalty system for sin, and there is a reward system for sin. And anybody who teaches you that that's not true is lying to you. And why would they want to lie to you? Because it might make you feel good about yourself, and that's how they manipulate you emotionally. You feel good about yourself, you might give them some things that you might otherwise not. So all we're interested in doing, Mary and I, is just telling you the truth. How you respond to it, that's up to you. You don't have to believe what we're saying, but it will be to your detriment if you don't. We've had 2,000 years of experience about these matters, which I think you'll find after 2,000 years of your own experience of these matters, you'll find that many of the things that we're saying to you, you'll find all of them will be true.
And you'll be pretty definite about it.
Yeah. You'll be as definite as we are about it. Yeah. We've had personal experience with these things.
Now, Jay, do you just want to mention about a sin being purposeful or ignorant, done in ignorance? Because there's still a penalty, isn't there?
Yes.
If we sin knowingly or even unknowingly, there is still a penalty associated with sin.
Yeah. An example of that is, let's say you didn't know about the law of gravity. Now, how could that happen? Well, I don't really know how that could happen, particularly if you're an adult. By the time you're an adult, it would be pretty hard for you to not know about the law of gravity, because, you know, every time you tripped over and fell on your face, there's the law of gravity at work. You know, so it'd be pretty hard not to know. But let's say you lived in a bubble somehow, and in a vacuum somehow, and in a gravity-less environment somehow. So let's say you lived on Mars in a gravity-less environment, and then you came back to Earth, and you didn't realise that there was such a thing as the law of gravity. So you're standing on the edge of the building, you go, oh, you know, in another environment, like an almost gravity-free environment, I can just jump off this building, and I'll just sort of float. And I'll float in the direction that I set my initial momentum. So, you know, if I was in space, all I've got to do is push myself towards something, and as long as the thing I'm pushing from is stable, and I push myself towards something, I'll go in that direction. I'll just keep going in that direction and keep going in that direction. But gravity, it doesn't work that way, does it? You stand on the top of a building and you push yourself up into the air off the edge of the building, and you might do a tiny little arc, which was the strength of your muscular system to get you that far. And then from then on, the 9.8 metres a second squared that's pulling downward on you is just... And that's where you're headed. All right? So that's an example of, you know, if you didn't know, the gravity is still working, and you are still going to hit the ground at a velocity, and if that velocity is too fast for your body, you're going to die, for sure, even if you didn't know. The difference, though, is you've broken the physical law, but you didn't know about the law, and so there was no intention to do it. And because there was no intention to do it, there's no emotional laws that were broken. There's no spiritual laws that were broken. There was only the gravity law that was broken. That was it. Now, same applies. I'm standing on the edge of the building and someone pushes me. My body broke the law, but again, there was no intention on my part to do it. There was no desire on my part to do it. And so when I hit the ground, I might be dead, but there'll be no other penalty other than just breaking that one law. But if I decide to jump, I'm not only breaking a physical law now, but I'm also breaking a series of spiritual and emotional laws, which all have their own penalties. So that's why jumping is much more serious than getting pushed off, or much more serious of inadvertently falling off. Right? And so this is the part of hierarchy of law that integrates with sin. All right.
Good.
Good. Can of worms, that sin thing.
So we've covered truth, we've covered God, we've covered laws and sin. The final thing we want to talk about is the human soul, which is really you in this whole system.
So the human soul is the thing God created. So your two bodies, your mum and dad created. So when we talk about incarnation, just for those of you that may not know, the soul is split into two halves at the point of incarnation. There's a spirit body and a material body. Got to get my gender right as well. Alright, so if the soul has masculine and feminine qualities. If the soul is dominantly masculine as a whole soul, then the two halves will be male. If the soul is dominantly feminine as a whole soul, then the two halves will be female. If the soul is a mixture of masculine and feminine, then one part of the soul will be dominantly masculine and the other part of the soul will be dominantly feminine. Right? So I'm assuming here that we've got a dominantly masculine, not a dominantly masculine or a dominantly feminine, but about 92% of souls are what you would classify as heterosexual in nature, and they don't have a dominant masculinity or femininity. They are more centrally organised, and so half of the soul will be female, half of the soul will be male. The male attracts bodies with the right chromosome to match the male personality, and the masculinity, the expression of masculinity, and the female attracts. When I say attracts, it's not a decision, it's an automatic instinctual thing that occurs. There's a physical body and a spirit body that's created at the time of conception. Alright, God created the soul. You could say mum and dad created the bodies through the sex act, right? Through conception. So, bearing that in mind, the main part of you is not these bodies. Can you see that? The main part of you is what God created, the soul. God created the soul, right? And God created the soul to be a thing that splits up, becomes aware of itself, and eventually merges back together again. The process of splitting up is called incarnation and individualization. The process of merging back together again, we called it union. Right. So that's the process of the human soul. The human soul is governed by all the other things we just mentioned. Truth, love, humility, faith. It's governed by law. It can sin. It can also not sin. It can be perfect. It can also not be perfect. It can make choices. It can also refuse to make choices. Right? The human soul is the real you. And every one of you is half of the real you. Half. The other half is out there somewhere.
Now, there's just two more things we really need to say about the human soul. You are gifted with free will. This is a part of God's gift to you at the point of incarnation. And most of our life on earth, God has designed for us to learn how to use that will in harmony with God's laws, or you could say in harmony with God's love. Now, another inherent part of the human soul is that it is emotional in nature. So that means we have an intellect, we have a mind, but the core essence of us is emotional. And actually the emotions drive or govern what we think about, what we choose to do. But most of us, through our incarnation process, unfortunately on earth today, have become kind of at odds with our emotional self, or detuned from our emotional self, and often pursue beliefs or ideas. Even our academic education often detunes people from their emotional self. Different forms of spiritual beliefs say emotions are the problem, that you need to overcome them rather than experience them. But actually all of those things are out in disharmony with God's laws and how the soul was designed to operate.
All right, well, there are our 5 subjects.
Do you want to list them all again?
So let's just summarise what they are. Truth, absolute truth. What is it? God. God exists. God's real. Laws. God created laws that govern the universe, govern us, govern our soul.
Create pain and suffering.
Create pain and suffering for those who break those laws. Which
Happiness.
introduces the term of sin, the process of missing the mark of love, or missing the mark of truth, or missing the mark of what is loving behaviour as God's standards demand. And the last thing was the way in which the human soul is created and operates. So over the next 2 days, you can ask us any question associated with those 5 subjects.
Just to ask if
Just
the
a question.
if the questions need to be principle based, or it can sort of open for personal feedback.
We will always, when we give you any personal feedback, it'll always be principle based anyway.
Okay.
So we're happy to answer a personal question as long as it fits somewhere in amongst the 5 subjects. And we will always give an answer generally that's principally based. Yep. So
But you can make it personal examples.
yeah.
Sometimes that's
The microphone up behind, 2 seats back.
Can we ask a question now, or is this only after?
Now we're going to have some lunch. Great. Is that all right? Have some lunch now, and we'll get started after lunch, and we'll just go from question to question to question to question, as long as they meet one of those 5 subjects. And if I'm confused about how they don't meet, whether they meet one of those 5 subjects, then it probably means they don't meet one of those 5 subjects, and we'll move on. So we want you to be reflective about what questions you ask, so that you're asking important questions that are going to affect your future. We don't just want to ask questions that are just so personal to your own situation that nobody else can benefit from the answers. Yep. Make sense? Yep. Also, can we ask, last week we just had a problem with people holding their mics. Can you hold them right on your chin when you're talking to us? Unless you've got a very loud voice, and then you can sort of hold them a bit further away. This way it'll be better on the microphone, because there's a lot of creaks on the floor and all those other things, and that interferes with the recording. G'day. Well, time to have a...
We just probably have 25 minutes, half an hour
Half an hour?
actually. Yeah, so it's about 12:30 now, so
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock back in here.
Yep.
How is everybody coping with the heat so
Coping
far?
with the heat, all right?
Not too bad.
It's a bit overwhelming.
Okay.
It's okay, better than we
Yes,
thought.
better than you thought.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
And if we all clear out now, we'll take some heat.
We'll
with
get
us.
some heat out of the building
Yeah.
as well.